Welcome to Mom and Mind, a podcast about maternal mental health from conception, pregnancy, to birth and postpartum. Real stories from moms and family members who've made it from struggling to wellness, and interviews with experts and advocates who work for moms and families to get the help they need. We discuss very real struggles that can sometimes be hard to hear, but these are stories that need to be told so that moms and families can know that healing is possible. This podcast is meant to offer information and awareness and is not a replacement for treatment by a professional or professional training. Thank you for being with us today. Welcome back to Mom and Mind. I'm your host, Dr. Kat. We have a super special guest on today. Melissa Bangs is with us. She's here to talk about her journey through postpartum. Melissa is a writer, director, storyteller, and comedian who is currently on a year-long West Coast tour with her husband, Eric, 4-year-old daughter, Adelaide, and 130-pound Bernese Mountain Dog, Etta James. They're touring Melissa's nonfiction storytelling performance, Playing Monopoly with God, and Other True Stories, a tragicomedy unlike anything you've ever experienced. In September 2012, at 40 years old, Melissa Bangs gave birth to her beautiful daughter, Adelaide. A month later, dramatically hormone depleted and sleep deprived, Melissa is admitted into an inpatient psych unit in a complete manic state. After nearly a month, she's sent home with a bipolar diagnosis and on lithium. What comes next is an extraordinary journey. We'll find out a little bit about her journey today and let you know where you can see this amazing, real, and important performance. Thanks so much for being with us, Melissa.
Thank you so much, Kat.
I'm really happy to have you on. I've heard so much about your performance and about the work that you're doing to get the word out about maternal mental health, and I'm excited to see it pretty soon myself. And towards the end of our chat today, I'm hopeful to let everybody know where they can also catch your performance. I'd love to start out hearing about your journey and how you came to be able to put your journey into a performance piece.
Sure. Well, maybe I'll start with a little background. I gave birth at 40. I was a late bloomer. My husband and I, we have lived several lives before we became parents. And I had never experienced depression, mania, anxiety. I had really never had a blip on my mental health radar. And had really counted on stability of my mind and my mental health. As we know, being pregnant, giving birth is a wild hormonal journey. And for me, my hormonal picture left me incredibly hyper vigilant. And while I was profoundly in love with this new little baby and had moments of feeling blissed out and had some pretty normal baby blues moments of, lots of tears, and it was just these profound waves of love. I also began to experience real fear and worry and this overwhelming sense of responsibility for her safety, which in this hormonal state that was really amped, it felt impossible to guarantee the level of safety that I suddenly felt was mine. And, she would eat every hour and a half to 2 hours, would feed, and I was breastfeeding, and we co-slept. And, she start feeding and within a minute be dream feeding, be passed out, happily sleeping while feeding. And I, with every little sound or movement that she made, was so hypervigilant. I felt like I had to investigate to make sure she was still alive. And for me, this meant that over that first month, I really didn't get any deep sleep. I felt as if I didn't get any REM, any deep sleep. And at some point, I couldn't fall asleep at all. And just a few days before a month, she was a month old, I entered an entirely different reality. And the day she turned a month old, I landed in the psych ward where I was for almost a month, 3.5 weeks. And, I don't want to give too much of the performance away and its specifics throughout the interview, but I will say that, within the storytelling performance itself, all nonfiction, I take the audience inside the birth of Adelaide, the meeting of her, the falling in love with her, that first month, the accumulation of the sleep deprivation and sort of the changes in my perception experience. And then I take you inside psychosis and that other reality and in the anxiety and the mania. And I take the audience to the psych ward, and that journey ranges from ethereal and beautiful to terrifying and tragic. And in the writing and the performance, do my very best to share the experience without filters, without blame of others and blame of myself, with a large dose of compassion and forgiveness for really any person that has ever experienced anything remotely in the realm of what I did, as well as a deep forgiveness for myself in the experience.
Wow.
And I'll just say that, you know, the number one response to the show so far, we've done 20 shows, and the vast majority wildly and beautifully have sold out. The number one response has been, I was laughing or crying the entire time.
Wow.
Very much tragicomedy.
Yeah, right. But you are doing such an important thing. I mean, it's one thing to read about what it's like, you know, for people who've never been through something like this, but to be able to go on that experience and that kind of ride with you really gives people a glimpse into what it's like, maybe for someone they care about, or just so they can develop a sense of compassion for others who are dealing with really, really difficult mental health changes.
Absolutely.
It's very powerful and necessary. And I think also for women or anyone who has been through something like this to feel like they're represented out there in the world, that there's somebody out there that gets it and someone's telling a part of their story too.
Yeah, it's so interesting. You know, my husband on this tour is the MC. He introduces the show, and it's such a sweet and profound moment that he does introduce the show and give you a sense of him and us and him in the journey. And he says, you know, this story is not meant to be prescriptive. And, you know, we have, as moms and as dads in our postpartum experiences, if we had, you know, a mental health breakdown or difficult chapter postpartum as moms and dads, they are vastly diverse, and there's such an array that we might experience and have experienced, are experiencing. But my hope is that me telling my story from a mountaintop and telling it without shame and with compassion for myself and others allows more of us to have the room to tell our stories. And, you know, I really feel like if my story were about me, I would have been bored telling it a long time ago.
Right.
But it is about so many of us, even if your details look really different from mine.
Right. Absolutely.
And I will say, while I take us to the psych ward, you know, the story doesn't end there. You know, it's about a third funny, a third tragedy. I call it tragicomedy. About a third of it is everything in between. It's much like life, but the story is ultimately uplifting and has been healing and transformative for many people in this journey so far.
I'm so thrilled to hear that for you and for the people who've been touched by this. And I do want to get into that in just a little bit, kind of what you've seen in terms of the impact of the show. And I realize that a lot of the details of your story are expressed in the show itself. Just in terms of the audience that's listening right now, you know, when we hear, or when people who are, I guess, don't know a whole lot about inpatient psych units and bipolar diagnosis and being psychotic, those things sound like, oh, well, what's that like? Or, oh, that's not me, or something that's very foreign, which is super powerful for you to be talking about this so that it's not a foreign concept or this other thing that happens to other people. Yeah. But it does kind of make me wonder, how were you treated by people? How did people care for you? Or how did people respond to you while you were going through this?
Yeah, I love this question. You know, the journey was long, and there were so many chapters, and there were so many different people that responded to me, right? If I start with the staff and the inpatient unit, I am to this day grateful that there was a safe place that I could be while coming back to myself and coming out of psychosis. And I'm grateful for just the hardworking and compassionate team that was there, from nurses to social worker to the psychiatrist. There were very difficult elements within my time in the psych ward, and not everything they didn't have all the tools that, looking back, I wish they had had. And some of it was bewildering and far from sort of ultimately the care that I would hope that one day all moms, if ever in this situation, would have. But I do recognize that they did the best that they could with the tools that they had.
Mm.
I'm very interested as a survivor and advocate and a former strategic planner with this journey in inspiring change and helping spark conversations about potential change within the medical model of maternal mental health. And, I'm from Montana, so I was inpatient in Montana, but all over this country, there is room to do better. And there are models in which they are doing better and best practices are emerging, which is incredibly exciting. For example, I was separated almost entirely from Adelaide. She was 1 month old. I'm a breastfeeding mama. And that separation alone truly could make any mama lose her mind.
Yeah.
And the idea that I was supposed to at some point look sane enough to go home, but was seeing my baby a half hour or hour a day and not every day. And the psychiatrist would decide whether or not I could hold her in those visits was far from the ideal.
Right.
And the team really didn't have a postpartum toolbox or practices in place. They weren't entirely sure what to do with me, and in many ways treated me as if I were any psychotic patient. And like I said, this is true for communities across the country, not just Montana. Places like the Mama Baby Unit at UNC North Carolina, Chapel Hill, that opened in 2013, where mamas and babies in every case possible are kept together, where they know much more about the impact of meds on breastfeeding. And in many cases, moms can be medicated to some extent or on some meds and continue breastfeeding. And even if they can't, there's help and support in the bonding, or there's help and support in keeping the milk in until they might not be medicated. But there's really a real beautiful approach in place to protect that bond, and in any case possible, keep mamas and babies together. And there are best practices in the US and the UK that I would love to see replicated widely here, where they actually do hormone testing and neurotransmitter testing for a postpartum mama, and recognize that this is such a tumultuous time in a person's hormonal journey, and that those extreme imbalances are a part of what's going on, that these symptoms have a root cause and in many cases lead to this extreme sleep deprivation, which is, one of the largest causes of the range of things that we experience postpartum, whether it's depression, anxiety, OCD, PTSD, bipolar, that sleep is critical. And there are best practices where a mama lands on a psych ward postpartum. She is given 3 to 5 days of sleep aid only, and see where she lands before you start throwing a whole bunch of other drugs at her. And I, while I am grateful I had a safe place, and I am grateful that I came back to myself there, or enough back to myself to go home and continue to find my way back to myself, I was on 9 different drugs in 3.5 weeks. And I'm really curious what would have been different if I had simply been provided with major sleep aid and been allowed to sleep for 3 to 5 days. Where would I have landed? Could they have started there?
Yeah. Right. We have a lot of work to do to get those type of treatment programs replicated everywhere. But this is where it starts, is identifying the need and making a point to talk about it, and having experiences like yours and sharing your journey is part of how these systems learn that they can do better. Hopefully they're learning.
Absolutely. I'll say in this case, the hospital actually did send, I've done 7 shows in my hometown in Montana. They all sold out. And the hospital, the inpatient unit, actually sent staff from nurses or invited them. And many came from nurses, social workers. Even one of the primary psychiatrists came to the show to see it. And I've had some really profound conversations with the director of inpatient care about the future, their programs in the realm of maternal mental health. And the hospital this year started their first postpartum support group. And so I hope this is just the beginning.
That's amazing that your work is changing the system. That's phenomenal. And you're still doing that. I mean, you're now going as wherever you can tell your story, which I just love that you're on a tour.
Thank you.
When you were going through the process of getting the help, how were people responding to you?
You know, my family and friends were amazing and surrounded us without judgment and with an incredible dose of compassion. I never felt as if anyone within our close community treated me as if something were terribly wrong with me or irreversibly, wrong, or with judgment, distance of judgment. And that was such a gift because I absolutely know mamas where their community all of a sudden holds them at arm's length.
Yeah.
A community that they absolutely need in their healing journey is not there for them all of a sudden because of their own fear, their own lack of knowledge, cannot be there for a loved one that has had a mental health crisis. And that is so sad. And I think in our journeys towards healing and whole health, that has to change. I will say my husband's role was specifically profound. And I still look back at who he chose to be in this journey. And I'm in awe and such gratitude. It makes me want to cry.
Yeah.
He's a brand new papa. We have a 1-month-old baby who needs me to survive. We're still pretty much newlyweds. We were together a year before we were married. And then we took us another year. We had one miscarriage early and then another year before we got pregnant. And so we're still early in our journey together as life partners. And all of a sudden, the me he fell in love with is just gone. And yet he chose a path that was truly life-saving. He never made me feel crazy. He never blamed me or in the slightest way acted as if somehow this was my fault. He never lost sight of the woman that he fell in love with. And even when I was in the midst of the experience about coming back to myself and was wrestling with doubt and shame and trying to make sense of what had just happened and what was to come. And was this somehow something I was going to wrestle with for the rest of my life? Would I ever come back to the me that I was? He never lost sight of the woman he, had fallen in love with and how strong and loving and grounded she was. And he advocated for me really every step of the way in the psych ward and beyond. And I have to say, I'm waiting on his one-man show because I think there are so many ways a partner can respond in such a harrowing and tragic experience like this. And it is very human, I think, for a significant other to really go to a place of fear and respond from that place of panic and fear and not know how else to respond. And I think, our partners need models of how to navigate experiences like this. And as an advocate now, when I'm walking through a mama through her journey, so oftentimes I feel like the number one person I'm walking with is the partner. Who has to become the advocate and the ground and the rock and the one who, garners as much education as quickly as possible if mom is not in a place that she can really do it for herself quite yet.
And, couples are all so different and made up of different personalities and different ways of coping and potentially going through their own changes as a partner.
That may have their own depression and anxiety going on postpartum.
Right. But having this information, having this perspective, having the knowledge about some kind of fundamental things to look out for or to follow up on or to pay attention to could be life-saving.
Absolutely. And I will say too that he couldn't have done it and we couldn't have done it without our family that came in and absolutely surrounded us and held us. And, in a modern family, that means that there's some divorce along the way. Adelaide has 8 grandparents in Missoula, Montana. And they held, while I was in the psych ward, grandmas and grandpas came in to be there for him and to take Adelaide to have sleepovers at their house. So we would joke that they were making sure that he would get sleep so he wouldn't end up in the room next to me at the psych ward. Because, he was sleep deprived too.
Right. Yeah.
And there was a point where I was out of the psych ward and finding my way back to myself, but still in the experience. And he was traveling for work for a new job. And there were 2 weeks a month he'd be on the road in Canada. And so my dad, my Uncle Dennis, who never had children, and I was the closest thing to a kid he ever had, my Uncle Dennis and my dad, my mother-in-law, Eric's mom, and then two of our girlfriends, the only two girlfriends we had that they weren't married, they didn't have significant others, pets, or children, would come stay the night, one night a week with Adelaide for several months because I couldn't sleep with her and get up every hour and a half to 2 hours to feed her, or I was going to end up back in the ward. And as someone who's an A personality that had always carried so much on my shoulders and had always felt like I could take care of things. I could take care of my life, what was on my plate, and I could take care of many others. I was a caretaker. I was a mediator. I was, a planner. And it nearly broke me to wrestle with the sense of failure, to have to be held by that many people that I couldn't even, that I had to have someone come sleep at my house night after night for months because I couldn't do that for my own baby. And yet, looking back now, Kat, what a beautiful gift.
Right.
To learn that I was that held.
Yeah.
And we didn't have to do it all by ourselves.
Right.
And to get to a place allowing us to be held, allowing me to be held and not blame myself and trust, find the beauty in the perceived failure has been such a gift in our lives. And Adelaide truly has been raised in community and by a village. And it's a beautiful thing.
Wow. And I can hear just in you talking about it, how transformative this must have been for you.
Yeah.
And the depth of passion and compassion that you have about helping moms, helping families understand this and make sense of this in the way that you've done through your performance. So how and where in your process did you decide to turn this into a performance?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. There was a time when I was in the psych ward that I considered telling no one. For a while, I couldn't imagine how I would articulate the experience because it was so otherworldly, so far from anything I had ever experienced, so far from anything that I expected was possible. And I wrestled for a while with a lot of shame. And so I couldn't imagine saying it out loud because I had a lot to work through in terms of blaming myself for it. But even in the psych ward, I think I had moments of seeing or understanding the power of the possibility of what we're doing. Because when I was making my way back to myself, one of the things I did was order my complete hospital record and read it to try and make sense of it all. And I remember that somewhere like around page 87, there's a note scribbled by a nurse that says, patient says she'll do comedy on this experience. And when I read it, I just laughed out loud. And I thought, I bet they changed my meds right after that. Thinking but they could not have possibly known that I did study improv at Upright Citizens Brigade in New York City. And Amy Poehler was my homework, the best homework I've ever had.
Right.
And, that was actually within the realm of possibility.
It's amazing.
And when I came home, so family and friends just really surrounded us, and so many friends and family and friends of friends or friends of family at some point would come to bring a meal or, want to come like watch Adelaide, hold her while I took a shower or while I went to get some exercise. And it just seemed that mom after mom after mom after mom had a story. And every woman that I would come in contact with had a story. And whether it was a moment or whether it was a couple of months or whether it was many years and they're still kind of off. since that one particular pregnancy, and they're still wrestling with anxiety to this day, or they're still wrestling with cycles of depression to the every mama had a story. And I remember so clearly a day that a dear friend sat on my couch and told me that she had pictured herself hanging from the kitchen rafters for months, every day for months after the birth of one of her daughters, that I just, holding her and crying with her, thought, oh my God. And she said to me, I've never told anyone this. And many of the moms that shared their tough chapters would say that. I've never told anyone this, and I thought, if the fact that I went to a loony bin and I'm talking about it makes me a safe place to say what you experienced, then bring it on. Let me be the safe space. And maybe if I share my story from a mountaintop in all of its details, the ones that who would ever say that out loud? That's so embarrassing and shameful. Well, what if I did say it out loud?
Right.
Would there be more room for you to say out loud those things you thought that were all about you and that somehow made you wrong, but in fact, they're vastly shared, very common, and you needed some sleep?
Right.
And your hormones were out of whack?
Yeah.
And so that is what we've done. We're just telling it from a mountaintop.
I love that. And I have chills over here. I so identify with you and how you feel about that. It's powerful to go from suffering to wellness to advocate to mountaintop, speaker, all of that. It's your transformation is helping other people heal and other people find their voice. And absolutely, you being able to share your story helps open the possibility to other people to know that they're not crazy. X, Y, or Z. They need sleep. They need support.
Yes.
And this is all super duper human stuff.
It is. It's so human.
Yeah. So I want everybody to know you and to see your play, and I'm so excited to see it myself soon. Before we tell everybody where to find this show, what I think is really also powerful before that is to end on that hopeful note that you were describing, that you did recover, and to give people a glimpse into what that was like and how that happened.
Sure. Oh, I'd love to share that. I will say, Kat, that I have an incredible amount of gratitude to this day for the doctor and the team that brought me out of psychosis within the inpatient unit. And that said, that his suggested care path for the long term in the end was not the one for me. I left the ward on lithium and on trilofan and was told really not to go off because his perspective was that I might hurt myself or hurt Adelaide. And I arrived home and I had many side effects from the lithium. And I also, day 2 or 3 home, insomnia set in. And I was told that if I didn't sleep, I would land back in the ward. So I was terrified because all of a sudden it was really hard to sleep.
Yeah.
And among the side effects from the lithium, I think the most disturbing and difficult was this complete emotional flattening where I knew that I loved my husband. I knew that I loved my daughter, Adelaide, but I could not feel love for her. I couldn't feel anything. And I was really scared of what might happen if I went off the meds. And yet I knew this was not my long-term answer. I knew that I could not raise her not feeling love for her. And I had this very small voice in me. And I wouldn't say voice in terms of a psychotic voice. I think, an inner knowing within me that sort of said, and again, this isn't your long-term path. This is not you. There is another answer. And it took me a bit to find the other answer. I saw a naturopathic physician who had an answer for me that was not the answer. My midwife took me to see another naturopathic physician, Dr. Christine White. Dr. Christine White in Zula, Montana, ND, saved my life. She did complex hormone and neurotransmitter testing.
Awesome.
And it was awesome. We got the results back and she was able to address my symptoms of insomnia, anxiety, and so much more of what I was experiencing in terms of, the tail end of the psychosis and the tail end of the mania, that she really addressed those imbalances at their root cause. Cool. And the anxiety and the insomnia faded to nothing very quickly, like 3.5 weeks.
Nice.
We put a safety plan in place with my husband, and we slowly took me off the lithium. And this was 4 years ago, and I have not had another episode since. To this day, I have a safety plan. And, when I left the psych ward, I was diagnosed bipolar. And, really the jury's out on whether or not I am bipolar. I still have only had that one episode. Life will show me. We will discover along the journey whether or not that is the case. But I have been educated by my sisterhood. I'm in a small group of national advocates and authors and research scientists that are all postpartum psychosis survivors.
Awesome.
And they are like 10 and 20 years my elders. And they have really said to me, I would say within this group, about half are medicated and half are not, and half consider themselves bipolar and half do not, or to have ongoing mental health challenges, about half do not. But they sort of all sat me down at one point on a call to say, hey, you may or may not be bipolar. You may or may not need to be medicated in your life. And yet the next hormonal sleep deprived chapter that may absolutely create upheaval for you and lead you to a situation very much the same could quite possibly be menopause. And you need to have a safety plan for menopause. And I turned 45 in April. So I do have a safety plan for menopause.
Good for you.
Yes. And yet I will say, for me and my mental health journey, which is mine, again, I'm not being prescriptive for other mamas, that my journey has to be yours. My hope would be that if the bottom drops off menopause, that we address that in the best way we can and address it at its root cause and bring me back to myself. And I would just say, my hope for mamas, papas, and humans having a mental health crisis is that they can find a care team that hears them, that respects them, that treats them with compassion and educates them, that we as people on these mental health journeys are given options and that we are given opportunities to educate ourselves, and that we do, and that as appropriate and when we're able, that we are given the opportunity to make choices and educated choices, sometimes with a team or with a safety plan in place to find our way to stasis, to healthy and to thriving.
Right.
And I have met mamas and papas in this journey who have been to hell and back and are now living on the other side of that experience, fully healed and thriving. And, many still managing the challenges that pop up from times. Sure. I do believe there are many paths of return to our whole thriving selves, whether it's therapy, therapy and meds, therapy and hormone neurotransmitter balancing, nutrition, hydration, exercise, sleep.
Right.
A lot of sleep.
Absolutely.
And I think about, there's incredible research out there that I first heard about at PSI, Postpartum Support International Conference in Detroit 2 years ago, that looked at that talk therapy alone could cut rates of postpartum depression in half.
Yeah.
In half, just by talking to someone.
Right.
So
powerful.
Very, very powerful.
Absolutely. And, some of the things that you are describing too is kind of listening to that voice, that if someone is telling you this is the way you're going to get better, might not necessarily be true. And it's okay to try out other options and find what works for you. And that there are multiple ways to feel better. And that with the right treatment, you will feel better. That's what's so amazing about it.
Yes. And we do need a partner or friends or a community walking with us on that journey to finding our particular path to healing.
Yeah.
We do need, I think, each of us to find a care team that is a partner and advocates for us, and family and friends, community that will walk with us and advocate for us as we find that particular path that truly is the road to our healing.
Well, and you're sort of, I don't know if you would describe it this way, but you're sort of creating a watering hole for that in your shows, partnering with organizations and bringing people together to be talking about things in one place. And, maybe a mom is there. So it sort of seems to me like you've created this amazing watering hole type of space where people who may have experienced something or who are not sure about what their experiences are coming in, plus organizations who are supporting your work and your efforts and your outreach to other organizations to get the word out about your story and your performance. You've created this beautiful atmosphere where people can come together and talk about these things. And what other kind of supports have you had for the show?
I love that image of the watering hole. I've never used that. I love that. I'll probably use it again.
Great.
This support has been overwhelming and truly inspiring. We could not do what we're doing without the tremendous support we have received. In Montana, we did 13 shows and over 50 organizations and individuals came together to support that journey, ranging from hospitals, birth clinics, mental health organizations, OBs, midwives, doulas, naturopathic physicians, integrative health clinics came on as sponsors, came on partnering with us in audience building. Before launching this tour, I ran a successful $34,000 GoFundMe campaign where I really reached out to the over 2,000 people in Montana that had heard my story to help bring this story beyond the borders of our state.
Yeah.
And our director of public health in Montana, Richard Opper, who's a phenomenal human being, teamed up with me to bring Postpartum Support International to Montana and make their training for practitioners available to folks throughout the state of Montana. And I went and shared my story there. And he went on film as a part of the GoFundMe campaign and said so beautifully and powerfully that, mental health, Montana's number one health crisis, and yet it is the realm in which in Montana we have the fewest tools for and know the least what to do with in terms of health, and that he felt like true mental health stories, and specifically maternal mental health stories, were a huge part of that answer to, as communities lean in with compassion and understanding and strip away those layers of stigma, creates an environment in which we actually can find those solutions, and that the stigma and the silence and that environment is not a place for change or healing.
Right.
In Seattle, we had shows in Bellingham, Seattle, and midwives, doulas, birth clinics came out to support the show. We sold out our shows in Seattle with only in partnership with these incredible practitioners, organizations, survivors, lots of survivors and loved ones of survivors. And, I'm now in conversation with Swedish Medical and Dr. Zantop, leading psychiatrist from a new cutting edge day program for postpartum mamas that just opened in June at Swedish Medical about bringing my show back to Seattle.
Fantastic.
In California, it's been amazing. In California, I just want to express profound thanks to Joy Burkhardt of 2020 Mom, Jane Honickman, the founder of Postpartum Support International and co-founder of Postpartum Action Institute, to her colleague, incredible colleague, Dr. Shoshana Bennett, Postpartum Action Institute, and the Dr. Show, really, truly for opening the door to California, and the many advocates and organizations, passionate survivor mamas here, also PEP in Santa Barbara. Each one of these organizations and individuals is a part of creating a model for the nation. And I'm deeply grateful and excited for the beyond generous sponsorship and collaboration of Maternal Mental Health Now in LA, Karen Post, Gabrielle Kaufman, and powerhouse Dr. Diana Barnes. They are lead sponsors for our shows in Pasadena on March 17th and 18th. And Erica Adler and PEP in Santa Barbara for our show there on June 3rd in Santa Barbara. Angie Fitzpatrick of Baby Blues Connection for our show early August in Portland. These are all just visionary, bold leaders in the maternal mental health movement that are bringing my story to their communities this year.
Absolutely. And what I'm going to do is have all of the details of the shows that are coming up that are already scheduled available on the show notes for our episode together. And I want to direct everyone who's listening to the website playingmonopolywithgod.com to catch up, watch the trailer for the performance, read reviews. You can purchase your tickets there. You can see the new dates that are always being added and really stay up to date on Melissa's path with her performance, and watch out for times when it's coming to a town near you or close enough that you can get to. And there are other places you can connect with Melissa on Facebook, Playing Monopoly with God and Other True Stories, on Twitter at MelissaBangs1. And you guys can follow the tour and connect with others and show up for the California tour and then wherever it's going next, because I know it's going to go far and it's going to go a lot of places. Which I'm so excited about for you. And I will be going to the show in Pasadena in March. So for all of you who are listening, who want to see the show, support the show, sponsor the show, bring it to your area, please reach out to Melissa and find out how to bring this important performance into your local area, because this is necessary and it can help build community. It can help bring people together. Organizations that are in whatever location you're listening from can come together and have really important conversations about maternal mental health. So I'm hopeful that everyone signs in and signs up and gets to your website and Facebook page to connect with you.
Thank you so much, Kat. This has just been incredible, and what a powerful and important opportunity you are providing for mamas in their maternal mental health journey. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to have been able to talk with you today, and I'm excited to meet you in person pretty soon too.
Yes.
Yay.
In Pasadena, baby.
In Pasadena. Yep. All right. Thank you so much, and best wishes to you on this incredible journey.
Thank you.
By joining us today, you are part of the growing community of people who are aware and concerned for mothers and families during this beautiful and sometimes very difficult time of life. If you or someone you know is having a hard time, help is available. You can feel better. Please look for resources for help at momandmind.com. Together, we can support moms and families so that no one has to deal with this alone. Thank you for listening and being a part of the Mom and Mind community.